Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, February 3rd, and we will hear the presentation, The Climate Data Power Hour. And I mean it when I say power hour. Wait till you see this lineup we have today. If you have any questions, whether they be technical questions or content questions, you can type them in the questions box at any time, and we will answer those content questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Because we have quite a list of panelists today, it would help me if you could, in your question, say who you want to answer the question. That just helps me when I'm going down the list. And if you have any questions related to technical stuff, I'll try to filter those out as we go along. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we are hosted by a few divisions. We have the APA Technology Division, Sustainable Communities Division, and Hazard Mitigation and Disaster Recovery. And you'll hear a little bit more about all this in just a moment. I just wanted to acknowledge all of them for coming together and bringing this group. Coming up next is a list of our next two upcoming sessions. You can register for these and all of our upcoming sessions by heading over to our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. This session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits and 1 sustainable and resilience credit. You can log your credits by heading over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our website, again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. If you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes. I post when we have new sessions available for you to register. And of course, on usually Monday or Tuesday, I try to post what our upcoming Friday session is, so you don't forget to register. And we record all of our sessions and post them onto our YouTube channel. So head over there, type in Planning Webcast, and we'll pop up along with our well over 400 recordings, all available for free. So head over and subscribe to our channel so that you get updated when new sessions have been loaded. That's the end of my housekeeping items. Again, if you have questions throughout the presentation, just type them in the Q&A box. We'll get to those at the end. So I'm going to now turn it over to David to kick things off here.
Thank you, Christine. I'm going to see if I can share my screen, and hopefully it's the right one. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Climate Data Power Hour. While this webinar is going for 90 minutes, it is called the Climate Data Power Hour, as most of the content is being presented in the first hour. I guess the power in our hour is that we are distorting the rules of space-time to accommodate this presentation. But generally, I just wanted to thank the exciting lineup that we have here, crossing public and private sectors. Ecopia, FEMA, First Street Foundation, Replica, Streetlight Data, Jupiter Intelligence, and added to the lineup is Esri. All have agreed to help share how they are trying to look at how we can plan communities in response to both hazards from climate change, but also enable more sustainable mobility and help mitigate climate change through the use of data. This webinar was jointly sponsored by the APA Technology Division, APA's Sustainable Communities Division, and APA's Hazard Mitigation and Disaster Recovery Division. This event is based on a similar one organized by Alta Planning Design, which has been making concerted efforts to think about how we can address climate change as part of our mission to help enable more sustainable and healthy communities. In addition to this, to the resources that you're going to hear about in this webinar, a lot of what we're have been thinking about as far as the technology division in collaboration with other divisions is how we can share a large amount of emerging technology resources and data resources that might be relevant to planners. And one of the ways that we've been doing that is through the active curation of our urban and regional planning resources page. This is something that was recently featured in APA magazine, looking at 5 climate tech tools that can help you build community resilience. But there are many other resources beyond those described. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to this presentation's moderator and an expert in resilience herself, Lee Plass.
Thanks, David, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. We're thrilled to have a lineup of experts from various organizations to share their insights and expertise with us today. First, we'll have Max Sokol, the Customer Engagement Lead at Replica. Replica offers mobility data to help identify where new investments can connect people to opportunity and correct the harms of past planning decisions. Max brings over a dozen years of experience in the planning profession, including local and national leadership roles with the American Planning Association. He will also be speaking about data and its role in the built environment. Next, we'll have Suri Desigan, Solutions Engineer at Streetlight. Streetlight data combines machine learning with deep transportation knowledge to shed light on how people, goods, and services move. And Suri has a wealth of experience in transportation engineering and will be discussing the technical aspects of his work. Following Suri, we will have Megan Purdy, the lead climate product manager at Jupiter Intelligence, which translates climate science into actionable data. Megan has a background in data science and product development and will be sharing her expertise on physical climate risk and its impact on decision-making processes. Next up is Benjamin Rance, the project lead for the Resilience Analysis and Planning tool at FEMA. The WRAPT tool gives the public access to data and GIS mapping that can help people understand their communities. Benjamin has been working for FEMA for several years and will be discussing community development actions that help increase resilience and awareness. After Benjamin, we'll have Matt Evie, the founder and CEO of First Street Foundation. First Street makes information about climate risk accessible, easy to understand, and actionable for individuals, governments, and industry through its products and educational resources. Matt is a recognized business leader with global experience and will be speaking about the foundation's work to define America's climate risk. We'll also have Bill Singleton, the vice president of Ecopia AI. Ecopia leverages AI to convert high-resolution images of the Earth into HD vector maps, offering unique insight for decision-making at scale. Bill has been with the company for 7 years, and he will be discussing the integration of vector-based maps and alternative data sets to help public entities better understand and improve the communities they serve. And lastly, we'll have Sunny Fleming, Esri's industry lead for the environment, conservation, and natural resources. Esri is a geographic information system, GIS software, location intelligence, and mapping firm. And Sunny will be sharing her experience on how GIS technology can be applied to environmental policy, conservation, and natural resources. So that concludes our introduction to our speakers, and we hope you're excited as we are to hear from them and learn more about the latest developments in their respective fields. So thank you for joining us today, and let's get started. Let's have our first speaker here. Megan, would you mind kicking us off, please?
Sure thing. I'll just share my screen. All right, we all set there?
Looking good.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for that introduction. I've been sort of a fan of urban planning and those things ever since I was playing SimCity as a kid. So it's very exciting to talk to you all today. So I work at Jupiter Intelligence. We operationalize the world's best climate science and economic impacts. And our goal is to help organizations, governments, and cities prepare for the impacts of climate change and hopefully minimize damage and disruption. The idea is that if we can do better at predicting how it's going to change, then we can be better prepared for it. So we use global climate models to understand the risks due to 8 different perils anywhere in the land surface of the planet. And we like to spend a lot of time making sure we're extracting data from these models that is decision useful, that maps to the particular vulnerabilities, and other elements that you might be interested in. So Climate Score Global is our flagship product, models 8 different perils across 3 different climate scenarios. And we look at multiple climate scenarios because there's multiple possible futures that could play out. So there's the 1.8 degrees Celsius scenario, which means that we do a lot to tackle climate change and we mitigate warming and we keep it under 2 degrees by the end of the century. And the reward is a reasonably better view of how the planet's future can play out. And we do a mid-range scenario as well as a more extreme scenario that could still play out even with all of our efforts to reduce carbon emissions and so forth. But it is something that is really useful for stress testing. We give all of our users data on a historical baseline, as well as every 5 years from 2020 out to 2100. This helps our users match the expected time horizons of the project they're working on to the timescale that they're looking at. So some of our users might be thinking about mortgage risk and looking out 30 years. Others are working on big infrastructure projects that we expect to be around in 50 years, 80 years. We also include uncertainty for all of our metrics, which is really helpful to understand the specific vulnerabilities that we might be facing. And everything that we do is at a 90-meter resolution worldwide. So that picture there was looking at transportation lines, and we were looking at flood risk across the transportation lines and highlighting those for this particular project. Another few views here for our application where we're looking at entire portfolios of assets and looking at how it's exposed to different hazards, flood on the bottom right, and then our main view on the top left. All right, so we provide way too much data. I'm the product manager for it, which means that I'm always asking our scientists to build more and more to understand the risk due to these 8 different perils that I see here. So we're up to 75 so far, and that includes extreme climate hazards like extreme winds from hurricanes, flood depths, and extreme precipitation events that can lead to urban rainfall and pluvial flood risk. We also look at more chronic things like heat, how often we're breaching critical temperature thresholds, the combination of heat and humidity that's critical for human survivability, cold wildfire, drought, everything in between. So nobody needs 75 different dimensions of climate risk, but everybody needs something different. And this is my last slide, and I want to spend the most time on it because I'm really passionate about making sure that you're matching the right metric, the right scenario, and the right time horizon to your concerns, to the asset that you might be modeling. So for example, the picture on the top right shows someone not in a good place after a particularly hot day. But by hot day, it's actually the combination of heat and humidity that makes things dangerous for humans. So we can use our data to look at the particular heat index that you might be facing and which neighborhoods might be most vulnerable and which might need mitigation efforts like cool roofs. Phoenix has been rolling out cool streets, trees, and so forth to help out those certain neighborhoods, looking at the specific heat and humidity that's important there. On the bottom right, I have a picture from the heat wave that hit Seattle last summer. The specific vulnerabilities of the mass transit infrastructure in Seattle are going to be different than the vulnerabilities in Texas. So in Texas, you expect high heat, right? Now that's even going up in the future, but you don't expect it at the same level in Seattle. So when you're looking and understanding the vulnerabilities to your assets, you need to have climate metrics that's going to match the exact vulnerabilities that you've been building to so far. So for Seattle, for example, we can look at the specific frequency of breaching temperature thresholds that will cause issues like this with your built environment. And this might be, just that it gets hot once during the day. It might be that you have a prolonged heat wave. We've got utility customers who are interested in metrics where it stays hot during the day and it doesn't cool down too much at night. Normally, they might be expecting temperature drops at night to be able to let their facilities cool off, but that's not always the case. So there are infinite ways to slice climate data, and it's really important to get the slice that best quantifies your concerns that map to the specific vulnerabilities of your assets and look at the time horizon scenarios that are most interest to you. I could go into a lot to the science and everything behind that. I will resist doing that, but if anyone wants to talk science, I can also talk science later. So that's all I have today. Thank you.
All right. All right, well, thank you, Megan. Next up, I'd like to introduce Matt with First Street Foundation. Matt, would you mind going ahead and kicking us off into your presentation?
Absolutely. It says unable to start video on screen all of a sudden. So if I will start sharing screen. Oh, there we go. Wonderful. Thank you for that. And let me get this up and running. So I am from the First Street Foundation, as mentioned, and our main product is Risk Factor. So Risk Factor really answers the question from a climate perspective on the physical impacts of climate change, but how do we answer this really large question of figuring out risk at an asset level? And so what we do to do that is create purpose-built, open source and peer-reviewed and climate-adjusted models. So we've done that for heat, for wildfire, for flooding, flooding being a coupled flooding model, so precipitation, including sea level rise in future scenarios and storm surge and all of those things together. And then on February 27th, on the end of this month, we will launch our hurricane wind product. So the fourth peril overall. All of the things that we create are at a hyper local resolution, like we like to say, which is if we're talking about flooding, it's at a 3-meter resolution within the US. Everything that we do is within the US only. Or with wildfire, it's at a 30-meter resolution. Wind will be the same, or with our heat properties. And it's available for every structure across the country. But not only is it measuring exposure, it also gets into kind of damage and downtime, and I'll talk about that in a second. All of our models are open and transparent. We think this is a fundamental important point to make when trying to decide on what data to use. As you were just hearing, it's very important to know what you're measuring and then what you're measuring it with, so that you get the answer that you're after. And so whether that is our open and transparent kind of full technical methodology to know exactly how we've made the models, or the reports themselves about the findings that we've made, but everything that we do is on our website. It's available. It's gone through the peer review process and accessible for you to really understand what the limitations of these models are, or what they're really great at making decisions with or helping to make decisions with. Outside of just the models themselves that give us the exposure, the likelihood of either water making it to the building or a flame or embers to make it to the building, we also calculate that consequence. So we have a partnership with a large engineering firm called Arup that then gives us this understanding of fragility curves. So when we're looking at a building, as an example here, there's all these different arrows on it, obviously, but different things matter to different perils. So for flooding, what is the first floor elevation of the building? And if it's 2 feet off the ground and you have a foot of water to it, then it's probably okay. But if it's 3 feet of water and it's 2 feet off the ground, then you're going to have water inside. Then with that, what is the damage from that? What is then the downtime that it would be for you to repair that building overall? If it's wind, what is the missile environment from the high gusts of wind that would then carry something to damage the building, or what is the roof made out of? If it's wildfires, what is the construction material? What is the defensible space? All of these things are calculated for each building, along with the environment around the building, to give you a view. And because of this open transparency, this building level calculations, we've really been able to have swift adoption across most verticals, especially at the kind of state and local level. So a great example here is the South Carolina Office of Resilience that uses our flood model for not only kind of adaptation planning, where would it be the best ROI to put in adaptation, but also managed retreat and planning around kind of buyouts and things of that nature for the state overall. But it's not just industry. We're also integrating this data for consumers. So we're a nonprofit, and it's core to our mission to not just get this data to institutions or the federal government or state and local governments, but also consumers, citizens, so that they can get that. So you can see our data on Redfin or Realtor.com or brokerages like Compass, where you can look up any property and see that information. But that isn't the full floor. I'll show you actually what this tool looks like if you were to use it. So if you go to riskfactor.com, you can look up any address, which is what people mostly do when I tell them that. And then you're able to see what's at risk for any given property. So you can see the high level score for these high resolution models for the exposure to the building. You can then see what's forecasted in kind of the worst case scenario. So a 1 in 500 flooding event this year or in 30 years, the first floor elevation of the building, and then the associated consequences, which is what we measure with our partners at AirUp. So you can look at maps of these things. You can understand what type of flooding you have. So coastal flooding, you can look at all the different probabilities from a very rare 1 in 500 event this year, or a 5% probable event, or in 15 years, or in 30 years. You can see how climate is actually making these water elevations to the building go up. Or you can look at things like damages. As I mentioned, giving the building characteristics, seeing this home that's 8 feet off the ground and it doesn't have a basement, it's a residential. You can use all of these characteristics to then understand the different scenarios. So what is going to be damaged from that rare event? So 9.7 feet of water to the building, just under 2 feet inside. So that means $100,000 to $150,000 in damage and 172 days of downtime to repair it. Or, you can go by depth to get what is the parametric view. So how likely is 9 feet of water to the building, or 3 feet, or whatever it might be, or things like average annualized loss. So all these metrics around maps, damages from fire, from flood, you can look at community risk, you can look at historic risk. All of this is available in the tool for you to look at and see what kind of infrastructure might be at risk, critical infrastructure, social infrastructure, all of this is data available for you to make the most informed decision possible. So this data is available through the tool, it's available through Bulk, and I'll pause there. I'm happy to answer any other questions on it, but our main goal is to partner with folks like yourself to try and get it in your hands so you can make the most informed decision possible.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. That was excellent. And following Matt, I'd like to introduce Benjamin, who's offering the federal agency perspective. If you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, go right ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Again, my name is Benjamin Rance. I am the project lead for the Resilience Analysis and Planning tool. Thank you very much for the invite to be here today. I understand that, having the federal perspective is a little bit different, but I do want to talk about some tools that are available to everybody, specifically focusing on climate data. So I am the Resilience Analysis and Planning Tool project lead, and the Resilience Analysis and Planning Tool, for those of you who might not have heard of it, it provides access to over 100 preloaded GIS layers. We really wanted it to help SLTT emergency managers, help them visualize and analyze data for all phases of emergency management. It's a combination of 3 basic data sets. We have community demographic information, we have information on hazards, weather, and risk, and then we also have infrastructure information. So by visualizing this data on the map, we can see it in tabular form, we can see it via pop-ups, really nice and interactive for users to have. Combine those 3 data sets with some powerful analysis tools, and actually the ability to add your own data layers as well. So we can actually focus on this, as we mentioned, another tool that we're going to analyze future climate conditions with, but you can add layers from ArcGIS Online, URLs, local files, or even for other platforms as well. So really, we like to say, having the wrap, it's free, it's publicly available to anybody who has an internet connection. That's really all you need to access it. And we like to say it's like having a mini GIS analyst in your pocket. Just really quickly wanted to touch on some of the information that we have. So we have 3 different types of layers. So our community demographics layers, they're pulled from the American Community Survey. These are 5-year estimates. Currently, we have information from 2016 to 2020. We're actually working on updating it, so we will have the most current information up through 2021 by the end of March. So you can see a number of our indicators that we have listed there. In addition to community demographic information, we also have infrastructure information. This comes from the Homeland Infrastructure Foundation level data, or HIFIELD. This is from their open source data, and you can see a number of their items that we have. And then we also have information and data layers on hazards, weather, and risk. So you can see a number of it is historical information. We also have current weather. So we partnered with the National Weather Service to make sure we include things like severe weather watches and warnings, outlooks, radars, and we also have some future conditions as well, such as NOAA sea level rise at the 4, 5, and 6 foot levels. So one of the ways that we can use RAPT and just the data within RAPT to take a look at, maybe some use cases is taking a look at, basically different layer combinations. So this is information already in RAPT. We can look at the hazard or the risk, in terms of a sea level rise. We can include some of our infrastructure points that we're pulling publicly, and really to help us identify vulnerable community infrastructure that could be at risk, and examine potential mitigation plans. So all of this information is available in RAPT. Another thing that we can do is we can also add data layers and focus on other platforms as well. And one of those other platforms that I wanted to talk about is the Climate Risk and Resilience Portal. So this is a product of a public-private partnership between Argonne National Laboratory, FEMA, and AT&T. And it really helps users examine simulated future climate conditions at mid and end of century for a range of climate risks. They currently explore future precipitation, temperature, and wind conditions for the continental United States, and that's at a very high spatial resolution. And then also with climbers, over the course of the next year, they want to add some additional climate impacts, and that includes inland and coastal flooding, drought, and wildfire. They'll also have data for some U.S. territories that will be included. So you can see their use of dynamical downscaling. We're going from a course resolution to different high resolutions at the community level, including at the 12-kilometer level. You can see these downscale data. They're really an ensemble mean of the 3 different global climate models. And one of the things that I like about this is, we had talked about scientific transparency, was mentioned by other presenters as well. There was widely published and peer-reviewed modeling and outcomes. I think having it based in a scientific study, having it peer-reviewed is really important, especially when we're dealing with data and promoting the data that we have. They'll actually have more tools and resources that will be shared to help users efficiently and effectively apply this data to the different analytic and planning needs. Right now it's in its alpha phase, but they will be coming out with other iterations of it in the future with additional information and support. So there are really 2 main services offered by Climber right now. They have a location summary tool, which is shown here. You can quickly summarize all of the variables for a single location. In this location, it summarizes key climate variables for a single 12-kilometer grid. So you can take a look at that, and you can see the graph on the right. It tells you like average seasonal minimal temperature, seasonal maximum temperature, precipitation, days with no precipitation. That's what we have currently. They're going to be adding additional climate risks in the future. And then the other aspect of Climber they have is exploring data for all of the lower 48 states plus Alaska. And we can see they have historical summer average temps for the Pacific Northwest. And then we also have, looking at our dynamically downscaled climate-based mid-century projections. That's under RCP 8.5. So you can see some of the changes as well. So really combining the 2 tools that I've talked about, we really want to be able to show how they're complementary. You can actually take Climber and your user can directly add a set of data, whether it's community resilience indicators or infrastructure data pulled from RAPT. So for instance, we looked at nursing homes in the Pacific Northwest. We also have the ability to bring in external data sets. You can do that via an API or user uploads. And then also I wanted to mention that you can actually use the resilience analysis and planning tool, and you can add data from Climber into RAPT and use that with some of the analysis tools to examine population demographics. So for instance, this is Climber data pulled in using an analysis tool of the population counter to show, okay, in one of those dark blue areas, which is going to have a higher levels of precipitation projected into the mid-century, we can see that in one specific area of that, there are a little over 5,000 individuals. And that's just one quick way to show kind of, what that would look like and how to use those tools complementarily. That is all I have, so I will turn it back over, and I appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you. And that was excellent to get a taste of the breadth of information that's coming out of FEMA. So following Benjamin, I'd like to tee up Bill with Ecopia. Bill, please take it away. I think you may
Don't
be
forget
on
to
mute, Bill.
unmute yourself, Bill.
Thank you very much, guys. We're really thrilled to have the opportunity to jump on today. I think what you'll see is there's a common thread of standard. I'll do a quick recap. There's going to be a common thread of data standardization and having data available to power a lot of the tools that are here today. I'm excited to talk about the content that's going to be available and is being created by our organization using the latest in AI. Our organization's sole focus is to be pixel experts and to convert the massive amounts of 3-band, 4-band, and LiDAR data that's available every year, and converting that into precise vector-based maps that can be used by any application in the environment. Esri's presenting after me, so really our main focus is not to change any sort of software or tools that you're using today, but to create that underlying base map data from the most recent aerial and satellite data. So why does our organization exist? Going back 10 years ago, we noticed that there was a massive amount of new constellations in the satellite field that were coming out. There was many new aerial companies that are creating data, and a lot of this information was going underutilized or not even being touched, both in the public and the commercial realm. And there was simply too much for organizations to be able to keep up and to manually extract important and critical assets from these data sets. And so that's really where our organization comes in. We want to be able to identify precise vector, linear polygonal data and linear vector data to help with a number of climate resiliency organizations. I can't tell you the number of public sector and civil engineers that we've worked with in the past who, even when the most recent aerial data is taken, there's a huge lag time between being able to create these base maps before we can get to the juicy work of statistical analysis, modeling, or driving to the insights that can help prepare the communities for climate impacts of tomorrow. Digital maps help serve as the foundation for many applications that help facilitate climate resiliency, like community development and economic growth. Our national standardized digital map data is collected from the latest aerial imagery, as I mentioned, and using this AI, we're able to keep up to date a national data set from 6 and 12-inch aerial imagery every year. So it's a very powerful tool that allows us to create data to help support the many different types of tools and applications that you might be familiar with. I'll give you a couple examples right here, whether it's helping to manage forest and canopy for municipalities across the US, like we're working with Austin and helping them manage that on a year-to-year basis, to helping organizations in Australia identify the best buildings to put solar panels on to help increase renewable energy sources. We also can map all of the impervious surfaces and specifically identify them across the nation to help with stormwater management, like we do in across the city of Detroit and the state of Washington, to helping to identify and mixing that with elevation data to helping to identify transportation routes that might be at risk, like our collaboration with organizations like Texas DOT. Even to a full land cover data set to help organizations with planning retreat from rising sea levels. In the transportation space, helping with pollution, we can help with active transportation plans. So communities can't even plan for a new future of less vehicles without understanding what's going on in today. So this is actually an example that we worked with the county of San Bernardino, which is the largest county in the US, helping them to extract important transportation information so that they can help plan for their future. So this is identifying things like sidewalk data, painted bike lanes, and even helping to identify trees in the public right of way for organizations in public works. and also tree canopy. We've worked with organizations in Florida and California who really want to have sidewalks be used by their communities. And so it's really important to understand where there is shading and where there's intersection between tree canopy and pedestrian right-of-way usage. So just sort of to wrap up, one of the things that we are most excited about is that this has been proven technology. We have created base maps in over 100 countries around the globe, working with federal governments everywhere. And one of the most exciting announcements that we want to make is that we've already had a big commitment from NOAA and their Coastal Change Management Program to go out and build this data set across the US. And so we are electing to keep this up to date every year from 6-inch and 12-inch aerial imagery. So this is going to be a data set that's available off the shelf to help feed into the applications that you're using on a daily basis. It's exciting in this particular initiative. We're actually bringing all 3 levels of government together, including the Illinois DOT and CMAP, Chicago's planning agency, to help create dedicated vector data sets based on their use cases, whether it's helping with flooding up at the federal level and coastal change management, to helping create equitable data sets across the state for the Illinois DOT, to helping CMAP with some of their local transportation initiatives and their long-term planning. So I can go into the technology in a little bit, but the most important thing is that this is a semi-automated process, and all of our data is triple checked by GIS professionals, so that you can have the so that we can reduce the requirement of post editing, so that your teams can get right to work versus having to manually edit data like you might have to with some of the open data sources that are available in communities. And really, our main objective is to create the highest quality vector data to help support your applications, to do this at scale so that we can focus on building data from the latest aerial imagery across the country, and to keep it up to date so that you're not working with data sets that might be sort of up to 3 to 5 years old. So we're really excited about the content that's being built. And with that, I'll leave my contact information, but looking forward to everyone's questions a little bit later on.
All right, thank you, Bill. And this is fascinating, the translation that's occurring with the aerial imagery into easy to work with data for planners. I'd just like to remind our attendees to engage with the Q&A and ask any questions that come to mind through that tool. So we are going to address those questions towards the end of the webinar. Next up is Sunny with Esri. Sunny, go right ahead.
All right, hopefully everything is coming through right now. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this event. I'm excited to be at our Climate Power Hour. I've been mostly excited, though, that everything we've seen today has had a geospatial component. And of course, that makes sense, right? We're fighting climate change on a geographic scale, at all geographic scales. And geography, and the power of geography, that really helps kind of translate across different industries, because you can juxtapose all these different data sets at different scales across the geography, but it also supports all of these different components of any given workflow. So that's really the geographic approach. It's supported by geospatial tools and GIS. And I'm going to show you a couple examples today. So there's really these 4 pillars when I'm thinking about, planning for climate change. And that's really evaluating the impacts, assessing those risks, understanding how best to adapt, and taking that action and conducting mitigation. So there's a couple examples here on the screen from communities where they have stood up something called ArcGIS Hub, where they are collaborating with their community and communicating with their community around their climate action plans or their resiliency plans. They're including things like these dashboards to visualize this information. They're including things like forms using Survey 123 to get feedback from their community. And the 2 that I've chosen here, one is the City of Tucson Climate Action Hub, and the other one is this Resilient Massachusetts Maps and Data Center Hub. So I wanted to just kind of start with those 2 examples. And there's a lot of communities right now that are taking inspiration from another example in the same vein. And that's the one that we'll focus on for a little bit here. But if you go to resilience.climate.gov, this is a hub that the White House has stood up. And this hub is helping communities understand climate into the future and how it might impact their communities. So the tools that are available through this hub allow those communities to explore. So here in the bottom left, you'll see there's drought, there's inland flooding, coastal flooding, extreme heat, and all sorts of other metrics that are being pulled from something called Esri's Living Atlas, which I'll talk about in just a second. And that data, they can model it, they can see it now currently, and then model it against different future scenarios to understand how they might want to incorporate those into their resilience plans. The same portal is also providing information to communities around policies, different resources, and even providing tools to help communities start developing their climate resilience plans. So I just absolutely love this. Again, I want to make sure that folks understand where they can go to just kind of explore this resource, but it's resilience.climate.gov, the climate mapping for resilience and adaptation. Woo, tongue twister for me today, right? All right, so how might folks get started though? There is, I think, the lowest hanging fruit, something that I encourage everybody to explore, something called Esri Maps for Public Policy. I have a lot of fun with the Esri Maps for Public Policy because what it does is it takes a lot of available resources in the Living Atlas, which I mentioned already, and it kind of brings them together with common questions you might want to ask. So there's some data sets in here around urban heat islands, bivariate, this is air quality juxtaposed with race, right? So we start to understand environmental justice issues as well with this and all sorts of other ways to explore this data. So definitely check out Maps for Public Policy. Those are really fun. And you can start kind of creating a collection. And then once you create that collection of questions you may want to ask, you can then share that out with stakeholders. And it's super quick way to engage with the data. Another way to get started is Living Atlas. I've mentioned this. It's what is feeding the CMRA from the White House. It's also feeding and the Maps for Public Policy. So I don't even know how many data sets are available in this, and they're provided by our authoritative shareholders, stakeholders, such as the federal government. So FEMA has some data sets in there. NOAA is contributing data sets in there. So here's just a couple, but the global temp data set, you can start exploring with that, bring it into your own analysis, include your own boundaries on top of these data sets. The National Weather Service, they have the 72-hour precipitation forecast. And so this is actually, time scale dependent, right? So you can play it, it's in real time. There's some live feeds in there. So this is recently with the precipitation in California. There's a sea surface temperature. You can start kind of understanding that and how it might manipulate some of your analyses. So the Living Atlas is a great place to get started exploring what data sets exist and then pulling them into your own analyses using your own authoritative data on top of that, quickly creating your own maps and apps to communicate information and understand this information. Another great way to get started is through training, of course, right? So yes, these tools exist. They are very easy to use, but you may want to take your knowledge and your understanding of how to use ArcGIS a little bit further. So if you were to Google Esri climate training, you're going to find some amazing information and resources around training for climate science and planning. So here's just a couple examples of what's in that training suite, right, is what I would call it, catalog of training. So investigating pollution patterns with space-time analysis, analyzing urban heat islands, estimating solar potential for those sustainability initiatives, analyzing climate impact and agricultural production. So training is a great way to get started. But we also have something called ArcGIS solutions. These are free to deploy, and I kind of consider them templates, right? They're templates is how all of these different apps can work together to enable whatever processes you might want to enable your communities to participate in. So there's just a few on the slides here. We have over 200 free solutions available to deploy and then configure to your heart's content. So with that, I just want to say thank you again for letting me participate in these lightning talks, the Power Hour. I love it, and I can't wait to see what you all do with this new knowledge.
Thank you so much, Sunny. And next up, I'd like to introduce Matt with Replica. So he's got a sort of a broad view on climate applications here. Let's maybe consider some other veins, for instance, transportation. So Max, please take it away.
Great, thank you so much. I'm getting a message that I can't start my video, but can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay,
You should now be able to show your video.
wonderful. Thank you so much. So good afternoon or good morning, everybody. So thrilled to be here with our partners and the APA divisions. And thank you to APA Ohio for hosting the webcast series. So just a very quick summary of the presentation. We're going to focus on the ways in which Replica can explore opportunities for climate change adaptation and resilience. I want to start with an overview of Replica. Replica provides data about the built environment and the ways people interact with it. We transform vast, disparate data sets into a holistic, up-to-date picture of what's happening across mobility, land use, people, and economic activity. Too often, planners are expected to make important decisions with data that's out of date, incomplete, or both. And afterward, you don't have the information you need to measure impact. So Replica was created to change that. Replica has 3 data sets, places, trends, and scenario, that are designed to help you get a complete picture of your study area and understand the effects of policy interventions that shape the built environment. So let's quickly summarize these 3 complementary data sets from the lens of climate change adaptation and resilience. Our first data set is places, which offers disaggregated outputs and gives you a snapshot of a typical weekday and a typical weekend day over a 13-week modeled season. Replica customers leverage our places data to understand baseline conditions for a wide range of analyses and to answer questions such as, what are the socioeconomic and demographic characteristics of individuals who travel through the flood zone, Our second data set is trends, which provides a series of aggregate data points delivered weekly for each census tract in the country. Customers use trends to monitor change over time and to answer questions such as, how did travel patterns and economic activity change following a severe weather event? Replica Scenario is our new product that complements what we offer with places and trends. Scenario is the first software product for forecasting travel activities anywhere in the country, and it enables our customers to model potential future conditions based on changes to population and employment. With a future iteration of Scenario, customers will be able to answer climate change related questions such as, how did travel patterns change following a road closure due to flooding? Now that we have an understanding of Replica's data sets, let's look at a few specific use cases that show how Replica data can support climate change adaptation and resilience work. One example of climate adaptation is to promote mode shift away from fossil fuel powered autos and toward more sustainable modes such as transit and active transportation. In this use case, we show destinations of private auto trips among commuters from New York City to Long Island, New York. This demonstrates Replica's ability to filter trips by both mode and purpose. And the existence of reverse peak auto trips is indicative of potential latent demand for enhanced train service, which is now possible thanks to the recently completed East Side Access and Long Island Railroad expansion projects. Another example of mode shift potential is to leverage Replica's mode and trip distance filters to look at short distance auto trips. In conjunction with safety improvements at targeted locations as needed, this data supports the premise that there are candidates for mode shift from auto to more sustainable biking and walking modes. In addition to shifting from auto to other modes, there's also great potential for climate change adaptation based on a shift to electric vehicles. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program falls under the umbrella of the Justice 40 initiative, which sets a goal that 40% of benefits accrue to disadvantaged communities. With Replica, it's possible to understand the travel patterns of residents of disadvantaged communities, including not only origins and destinations, but also the roadways used, which could inform an equitable deployment of EV charging stations. Replica also offers the ability to filter data by the land use of trip origins and destinations, which can be compared to residential vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, to understand the relative auto orientation of different land uses. For instance, you can compare the residential VMT for single versus multifamily residential trip origins, and these maps show that higher density residential development generally corresponds to lower VMT and thus more sustainable transportation choices. Last but not least, Replica data can also help to illuminate trends in telecommuting, which can be one of several strategies to promote transportation demand management and specifically a reduction in overall travel. In this example, we compare work from home data between a pre-pandemic fall 2019 baseline and a new normal fall 2021 season. Broadly, Replica's 3 products can help to solve complex urban problems by serving as an augment to existing data sets and processes. Replica's data can equip planners with insights you need to establish a common operating picture and create a shared understanding of the status quo. This baseline of information empowers planners to create the policy and development decisions that are a direct response to the current conditions of your study area. And finally, you'll want to monitor the impacts and performance of those initiatives in near real time, and Replica makes that possible. As the preceding use cases demonstrate, there's a wide range of applications of Replica data to support climate change adaptation and resilience strategy. Really looking forward to the Q&A, and with that, I will pass it back to our moderator. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Max, and thank you for those really compelling descriptions and examples of Replica's tools and applications. And to give you another perspective on climate-related data and tools with a view towards transportation applications, I'd like to offer the floor to Sri with Streetlight data. Sri, go right ahead.
All right, thanks, Lee. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Sri Desikun, and I'm a solutions engineer representing Streetlight. And for those who may not be familiar with Streetlight, we are a leader and pioneer in transportation big data analytics. And with our online SaaS application, you can quickly and easily get travel patterns along with demographics data for any mode, any road, and any time. So some of you might be curious as to how Streetlight and its transportation analytics are related to the theme of this webinar today, but according to EPA, about 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions are related to transportation. And access to accurate transportation metrics is really significant in reducing the carbon emissions from transportation. So that being said, today's agenda, we're going to be talking about Streetlight a little bit for those who are hearing about us for the first time. And I'm going to showcase how do we measure and monitor the existing VMT and emissions, and then talk about some strategies as to how do we effectively offset it. So Streetlight was started to help smart transportation professionals access the power of big data for insightful decision-making. So our algorithm connects connected data, anonymized location data, and several contextual data into meaningful insights. So you're able to access specific modes, specific volumes for any data period across North America. Vehicle miles traveled is a very key contributor in understanding greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see on the chart here, Memorial Drive in Atlanta, key roadway near downtown Atlanta, started seeing VMT peaking up towards the weekend as opposed to the weekday after the pandemic. So Streetlight Insight really helps decision makers and planners stay relevant to the changing travel patterns. You can also understand vehicle hours of delay, which represents emissions from idling of cars and trucks on highways and signals. So how do we measure the sources of emissions? Let's take an example of this community in Bel Air, Houston, where I represented the external gates as smaller circles. And with the easy origin destination analysis, you can understand the internal, external, and external travel flows for any data period. Once you get the volumes, estimated volumes for these 3 categories, and you get the trip distances, the VMT calculations is just a multiplication. And I've attached a greenhouse gas equivalency calculator from EPA, which lets you how to determine emissions from this data. So Bel Air now knows that the external trips are the key contributor to most VMT in that neighborhood, and now they can design effective strategies around the valuable information. This is a case study from Met Council MPO in Minneapolis. They had this challenge of absence of jurisdictional specific data, and because the traditional methods overcounted the emissions in smaller communities. Streetlight's OD was the savior here because it was able to give volumes per mode for the OD pairs per jurisdiction. So they were able to quantify the emissions with the help of emission rates. So this data is publicly available. I've dropped the link here in the slide. You're free to go and explore that dashboard. Now let's focus on the strategies. So the simplest of the strategy is going to be promoting active transportation. So planners can quickly scan a neighborhood for identifying the hotspots as shown in the first image and lay powerful demographic data per mode, again, which could help with the social equity analysis. Finally, in the picture down, people can understand destinations and origins of pedestrians and bikes from stations that help with station ingress and egress planning. The next strategy is the public transit, where we can help with first mile and last mile studies. We can enrich, augment transit demand models by providing the latest 2020 census demographics along with the travel patterns. So in a nutshell, planners can get smarter data and make smarter decisions. This is a quick case study on how Santrans, public transit agencies in California, use Streetlight to handle the problem of low ridership post-2020. Travel surveys, as you might know, is expensive and captures a biased sample. So Streetlight OD was the savior here again with their granular OD analysis, which showed that the commuting windows kind of reduced and newer travel trends emerged because peaks now started emerging at 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. So the agency was quick to implement these fixes and boosted their ridership by 30% in just 2 weeks. So I'd like to reiterate that every complex problem sometimes just needs a simple solution. Finally, I want to end with the EV planning strategy, which is the latest buzzword in the industry. Two popular questions come in all of our heads. Where should I be placing the charger and what type of charger should I be placing? Our metrics such as trip volumes, trip purposes, trip lengths, vehicle dwell times, as you see in the chart above, can really help you solve those questions. And the traveler demographics data is again invaluable because planners can ensure that the lower income neighborhoods and the renters have equal access to the public chargers. Finally, I want to announce Streetlight's recently announced EV as a mode metrics. So you can now understand EV as a specific mode and understand travel patterns and metrics specific to electric vehicles. And with this, you can gain valuable insights such as how much EV activity is happening in your region, or are there gaps in your EV charging network, or are your EV patterns different from your hybrid and gas-powered trip patterns? So we can help you solve all those questions in any neighborhood across North America. Finally, I wanted to wrap up this presentation by giving a bonus gift from our side, the Transportation Climate Solutions ebook. This is an excellent resource to go through how Streetlight could be useful for a variety of climate challenges. And that wraps up our presentation. Feel free to reach out to us. Thanks so much for the time.
Great, thank you, Sri. And thank you everyone for, well, specifically Sri, thank you for sharing those descriptions and examples of Streetlight's empirical data offerings. And thank you all panelists for some really compelling presentations over the span of the last hour. We'll now kick off some moderator-led Q&A and followed shortly by fielding of audience questions. So with that, I'm going to start my video. Hello. And pose the first question. So panelists, as you answer the questions, please turn on your video. And if you'd like to be queued up for an answer, just raise your hand. We're going to spend around 2 minutes per question before we transition into audience Q&A. So the first question I'd like to pose to everyone is, how has your company's data and technology been integrated with existing planning systems and processes? And can you discuss any partnerships or collaborations your company has with municipalities or other organizations in the urban planning field? Max, go right ahead.
Thanks so much, Lee. So one example of how we've been partnering with agencies around the country is that Replica data recently informed the Regional Transportation Authority's draft 5-year transit strategic plan for the Chicago region. RTA leveraged a wide range of Replica data to inform their strategic plan, including trip purpose, travel time, race and ethnicity, and household income data across multiple seasons from places, as well as change in trip volumes over time from trends. Specifically, they looked at comparing transit commute time by race and ethnicity, comparing household income of transit riders across different seasons, and tracking the change in total trips by county for the 6-county region. And this is just one example. There's more than 100 public sector agencies that have access to Replica data, including a combination of state agencies, transit agencies, metropolitan planning organizations, counties, and municipalities. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for that. I see Megan, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, can I also answer?
Go right ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, at Jupiter, we actually have a program that I touched on in one of the Q&A responses to provide our data at free or low cost to underserved communities, whether in the US or around the world. So we did one project recently. I don't think I can say the name of the city, but a poor city in the US where they were interested in heat and flood exposure across their community. And so we were able to sample different neighborhoods to get a perspective on the range of hazards they were facing, so then they can incorporate that into their long-term planning horizon.
All right, thank you, Megan. And I think we have time for just one more. So Sunny, I saw you had your hand raised as well. Would you mind going ahead with a response?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for letting me respond to this one. We partner with a lot of, Esri partners with a lot of our clients all the time, but I think one of my favorite stories comes from the Southern California Association of Governments. So they have, I think, 198 member governments, so close to 200, and they've put together a hub, the regional data platform, that is like the centralized source of authoritative data for all of their member governments. And that, again, is using that platform, ArcGIS Hub, that we saw with the CMRA from the White House and the two examples I shared before that. So it's just been a really flexible, agile tool for that.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to the next question here, just in the interest of time. And so the question is, how does your company ensure the accuracy and reliability of the data provided to urban planners? I see, Sri, you have your hand raised.
Sure, I can go first. So Streetlight data, the key differentiator with our company is that it's heavily validated, lots and lots of white papers for several of our metrics. The volumes take into account a lot of training data, which is provided from permanent counter locations. And for the data nerds here, we consistently have provided an R-squared value of 0.98 and above for several volumes that's being estimated. So again, all the volumes metrics that I presented are all estimated and not modeled. So that's how the accuracy and reliability stays intact.
I appreciate you making that distinction there. And I saw, Matt, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks for letting me weigh in here. Yeah, from us, what we find really valuable, one is, as we talked about, the open and transparent nature of how we actually put our models through the peer review process, or having the full technical methodology on our website. But really, it's after events. So for flooding, wildfire, heat waves, precipitation events or flooding events. So Hurricane Ian is a great example, or the flooding that's happening in the precipitation, the atmospheric rivers that happened in California recently. All of those things actually match up against their hazards. So we actually do in-field validation, but also we have tens of millions of people looking at our data each day from a consumer perspective that are able to then also validate through our customer support. So it's in-field validation plus technical validation that we find to make that perfect kind of match, to be able to understand if we're being accurate or not, or if something needs to be adjusted.
You can never get enough validation. Thank you. And I want to get one more response here. I see Jordan, would you mind responding to that question, and then also offering a little bit of an intro as to who you are?
Yeah, of course. I unfortunately can't start my video at the moment, but so I'm Jordan Branham. I'm with Argonne National Laboratory. So here just to answer questions about Climber. And I think one of the things that's nice about this field in general is there's a lot of peer-reviewed research being generated, as we've heard many times. So Climber, all of our data sets, variables, models are peer-reviewed, and if you actually go to Climber, we link to a box where you can access, I think there's 20 some odd different journal articles with all of the methods and the validation of those processes. So there's that's really coming out of our environmental services division. And then we have many different steps going from producing this data in its raw form until it actually is generated and put on Climber. So.
Thank you, Jordan. And just for reference for audience members, so Climber is a tool that is produced in partnership with Argonne National Labs and FEMA. And I think we can allow for one more question. I see, Bill, you have your hand raised. Would you mind? responding?
Yeah, so especially, sorry, let me just I'll turn on my video. So in terms of the making sure that our data is accurate, I mean, anybody in, especially in the automation space, who says that they are just using automation tools to extract highly precise information from remote sensing data, that should be a red flag for you, because there's always going to be ambiguous cases. There's always going to be edge cases. Even when it comes to definitions, clients can be different from one to another. And that's where we really specialize, is making sure that we conflate to current data sources, but also really have an understanding of what you're using, what kind of representation do you want to have of those features? Because once we've done the work, it's actually quite easy for us to convert whether you are looking for polylines or vector data or polygonal vector data. Everything of Ecopia's is triple checked by our team of geospatial experts based on the tools that we've developed internally. And once everything is created, one of the beauties of the system is that really we're just looking for delta changes in pixel values to convert in to create our probability map to convert into vector features. So it's very easy for us to detect and maintain and track change after a lot of the work has already been done as well. So there's a lot of, you always want to have human intervention to make sure that we have to make sure that you have the highest quality of results, to reduce any post editing that is required as you get closer to the application layer.
I appreciate the in-depth insights into the validation processes from each of the firms. So thank you all for responding to that question. Next up, I'd like to ask our next question here. So how does your company's data and technology support the needs of vulnerable or marginalized communities in addressing climate change? I'm going to open up the floor to Sunny. Sunny, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, that's a very important question for us here at Esri. And so in our partnerships, and I mentioned the Esri Living Atlas during the presentation, but we have Justice 40 layers in there that communities can pull in. We also have something called Community Analyst, and we've seen that as a really powerful tool because it provides users with over 2,000 demographic variables that they can query and bring into their own analyses for, equitable park planning, shade equity, things like that. So there's a lot of available resources from our authoritative partners that contribute these data sets that our communities can pull in to start asking those questions. So I encourage you all to check it out.
Thank you, Sunny. And Max, did you want to respond as well?
Sure, and I think it dovetails a bit with Sunny's response, but one thing I just wanted to note was that Replica's disaggregated data in our Places product makes it possible to filter data not only by the characteristics of trips, but also the socioeconomic and demographic characteristics of the trip takers. So for instance, we could filter the data to look at the travel patterns of low income and/or minority populations. We also have the ability to process custom geographies, such as the US DOT defined disadvantaged communities. So not only can we understand the home and work locations of disadvantaged community residents, but also get insight into their travel patterns, including the specific roadways that are used for their trips. And so in this way, the use of Replica data can inform an equitable approach to transportation planning and the corresponding goals related to climate change mitigation.
Thank you. And so next up, I want to give Benjamin a chance to respond. And then after Benjamin, Bill, if you wouldn't mind going as well. So Benjamin, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to mention really quickly, I think obviously a lot of great tools and there's a lot of them out there. I think one of the reasons that, we're in FEMA, we kind of focused on the resilience analysis and planning tool is that it is free. It's openly available to the public. All you need is an internet connection to access it, right? And we pull all these data from the authoritative sources. So, it's available at no cost to everybody. And with that, doing peer-reviewed literature review, we provide a FEMA Community Resilience Index, which also provides, kind of a value, a standard measure of a standard deviation of the potential challenges to resilience. So not only providing that value to say like, okay, this community might have greater challenges to resilience, we then provide you with the specific information on the indicators that contribute to that potential challenge of resilience. So it's kind of taking a deeper dive into say, okay, here might be an area that we want to focus on in terms of FEMA that might be marginalized or disadvantaged, but then what contributes to those factors that lead to a community being in that category? So really, we try to make it as open and available as possible so local everyday emergency managers can use it. So that's really how we try to focus on the whole equity issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Bill, go right ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leanne. So just in terms of some of the more recent projects that we've done, I think canopy equity has come up a little bit earlier on, but really making sure that it helps with things like heat absorption and making sure that people are comfortable when they're using pedestrian transportation. Not only can you just use it from a visual standpoint, it's actually fascinating to see a sidewalk network and to see neighborhoods that just have no infrastructure in these tiny pockets. But even if you were to do a statistical analysis, one of our recent customers identified that 74% of their population was within 100 feet of the nearest sidewalk. But that still leaves a quarter of your population that is, and typically a quarter of the population that most relies on mass transit to get to some of the, to get around the city. And so there's a huge misequity there in identifying certain neighborhoods where people don't even have a safe mode of transportation to get to some of the major routes that they use on a daily basis. So there's a number of different ways that you can do it, and that's just one feature. There's lots of others in terms of impervious surfaces, natural parkland. But once you have an understanding of what time zero is, it allows you to create prescriptive and even potentially identify low-hanging fruit to make your community a little bit more equitable.
I really appreciate how everybody or how our panelists are and their firms are finding ways to integrate pretty seamlessly these equity considerations into their tools. So with that being said, I did want to move on to our final question here in our final 7 minutes. And I was hoping you could, and raise your hand to respond, if you could discuss any potential limitations or challenges in implementing your data and technology in urban planning efforts specifically. Is there anybody who'd like to respond to that particular question? All right. So I think with that, we can go ahead and possibly move on to our audience Q&A component of the webinar. And with I think we're going to hand the floor over to Christine, who's going to field those audience questions. Christine?
Yep. Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Yep. All right. Our first question coming in, and this is for everyone. Can you give some examples of how small and rural communities who are concentrating on planning tools such as comp plans could use the data? A lot of examples given were of urban areas. So again, giving examples of how small and rural communities concentrating on planning tools such as comp plans can utilize this data. I didn't see whose hand went up first, but I see Sunny because she's in the upper left corner for me. So Sunny, why don't you start?
Yeah, I get the benefit of that upper left corner.
Apparently.
All right. Yeah, that's an excellent question. And when you pull in data sets, so, the Esri platform, I think of it like a toolbox. And then the data sets that are available on Living Atlas or bringing in your own authoritative data sets, those can happen really at any geography, at any scale. So it's a really flexible and powerful platform to be able to configure whatever it is for your workflow, whether it's just that analysis and visualization of the data or even communicating with your citizens. So regardless of whether you're urban or rural, you can take advantage of the same pattern no matter what with the platform and stringing together the apps to achieve whatever goal you're looking to achieve. So.
Thank you. And Jordan?
Yeah, hi. So I think one of Climbers' benefits here is that in terms of helping rural communities and just lower resourced communities in general is something that Ben touched on, which is it's free access right now. And we'll be moving forward, and we'll have more data being integrated in the future, including flood and wildfire and drought data this year. So any community has access to that. And then we provide a couple use cases, and we'll be providing more use cases that kind of walk through communities in terms of how you can make use of this data. And obviously the information that any planner brings to the table is the most useful starting point, because that person knows what have been the issues affecting that area going back many years. So that is a useful base case, and then they can use the data to kind of identify what might become worse moving forward.
Thank you. Bill?
Thanks, Christine. Really, the way that I would answer this is our content and technology is the great equalizer. There's so many communities that I work with, well, even the largest ones, LA, Chicago, that their data sets are either out of date or they haven't even taken the time to extract some of this important information. And so you don't want to be working with data that's 5 years old. And a lot of other communities haven't even had the resources internally to be able to collect that for themselves. And so really what we want to be is that just that base layer where you can use that for any of the applications that you might be thinking of doing without having to spend internal resources just to get started. And so that's really where we want to be able to create a standardized data set for all communities across the US and make sure that it's up to date based with all of our aerial partnerships that we already have across the US.
Thank you. And Matthew?
Thanks. Yeah. So within risk factor, one of the things that we really do is allow you to look up any geographic area. So whether it's a neighborhood, a city, a county, or state, or an individual property. So if you look up an individual property that's in a rural area, you'll get that whole parcel of land and all that information that's available for that property. But then also you can look at the maps, as I brought up, and it'll show you all of the things within that rural area around the percentage of roads that would be potentially impassable by flooding, or the number of commercial properties, residential properties, critical infrastructure like wastewater treatment facilities or whatever might be in that location, or have all been identified. And then you can actually look at the risk of those pieces of infrastructure by clicking on them on the map. So everything is available for the geographic boundary that you are interested in, for whatever purposes you might be using it for. So we kind of, as was just mentioned, we show the same amount of data regardless for the location. So make it really easy for folks to use.
Great, thank you. I want to touch a little bit more on something that Bill had mentioned regarding updated data. This question is in regards to tree canopy. We're trying to figure out how often we should update our mapping, especially since canopy tree can take a long time to grow. You mentioned annual updates, so curious on your criteria to measure change. And I guess we can kind of open that up to things beyond tree canopy as well. But let's start there. And Sunny, you're up in my left corner again, so you're up.
All right, I'm a fan of this left corner. How do I get this every time I do a webinar?
I know, right?
Well, thanks. Well, yeah, in regards to tree canopy specifically, one of the things as I was preparing for the webinar, I was kind of researching on this and what available tool sets or even some of our partnerships have available. But we have a product called ArcGIS Urban. It's part of the Esri platform, and it now brings in those OpenStreetMap 3D buildings and trees automatically into a city's data model. So they can get started using that right away, which I think is really cool. Another thing with kind of keeping data updated and having it available to you is that we have the community map program. So this is where cities and counties, they actually come into the community map program and they're able to provide edits to data, which this is one of my favorite things to do is fly around base maps and hunt for those inaccuracies, right? And so this is the way that we can actually work with the community to provide updates to that information. And they can also provide authoritative information into the Living Atlas as well. So lots of ways to do that. But on the trees thing, I thought the ArcGIS Urban with OpenStreetMap 3D stuff was really cool. So
thanks. And Bill?
So that's a really tricky question, because are we talking about California where there's huge changes, or?
Well, I know for a fact that we're talking about Ohio because I happen to know the person that's asking the question, and they're in Ohio.
Yeah, so Because it even matters depending on which latitude you're at, right? If you, the most important piece when you're looking at a sort of a northern community is you're collecting around the same time of year, hopefully sort of in the dead of summer. I do want to sort of, if I can focus with the human features, you're typically looking between 5 to 15%. 15 is really sort of rare in certain high growth communities in terms of buildings and human built features. On the canopy side, it really does depend on some of the outlying special events that have occurred. But typically we've sort of seen differences in sort of the range of 5% per year. So it really does depend on the community, but that's why it's one of the reasons why you want to try to maintain it in a specific year. Because even if you start looking at change of 5% a year, that starts to get significant as you do 5%, 5%, 5%. So that would be my best way, but I'd love to sort of dive into a deeper conversation about that.
Thank you. Next question. This actually kind of has to do with tree canopy. And this one is specifically for Matthew, but of course anyone else can jump in. Can you address the issue of data regarding climate risks and trade-offs / mitigation balancing? And the question comes from one of your slides mentioning that trees within a 50 feet of a building is a fire risk. However, trees are an important measure to mitigate heat, right? The tree canopy, and also can contribute to erosion control. So there's trade-offs to risks. So again, the question is, can you address the issue of data regarding the climate risk, sort of this, not a numbers, more like a subjective kind of look at the data regarding the climate risks and their trade-offs?
Yeah, it's obviously a very difficult question. So the slide that I presented was more on the idea of how do these factors impact the individual property. So obviously, as mentioned on the trees is a great example of the defensible space around a property and how much that actually has proven with our research with ERA to increase the likelihood of a home to combust, but at the same time provides all these other benefits for whether it's extreme heat or precautions against flooding or whatever it might be. So we aren't prescribing kind of one or the other. It's within our tool, we show the impacts of having that, for example, trees for that, or shrubs or whatever it might be for the defensible space when it comes to wildfire. And then as mentioned here for the pervious, impervious surface, the type of soil, we use that within our flood model to then understand exactly what would happen within the flooding simulations, which then would account for that to actually be there. So those are things that are within the tool to control, but they aren't necessarily a great way of understanding trade-offs between one or the other. And it's a great point that it's something that we should be considering at a broader scale, but we only have that kind of detail at the property level versus more of the macro of a city, county, neighborhood, et cetera, which is really when a larger consideration needs to be taken into effect as well.
Thank you. Perfect. Next question is for everyone. Out of all the tools that we've talked about today, or maybe even tools that we haven't talked about, are there any that will allow users to map information based on boundaries of tribal lands, whether it be reservations, trust lands, tribal statistical areas? Benjamin.
I stole the top left corner from
You
Sunny.
did.
I apologize.
I'll let you two duke it out. I don't want to be a part of this.
No, I really like that question because obviously, when we're talking about marginalized communities and we're talking about disadvantaged communities, obviously tribal nations have to be towards the top of that list and be in the conversation. So for the resilience analysis and planning tool, all of our information is broken down into kind of 3 geographic areas. It's at the county level, the census tract level, and at the tribal level. So all of our indicators, including our community resilience index, are at those levels. So we have a whole tab with specific indicators that provides that information along with all of the tribal boundaries. So you'll see that information if we look at it, not like, okay, these census tracts make up this tribal boundary or this county covers the tribal boundary specifically for tribal nations. And we really think that's important, so we have a whole tab dedicated to it. It interacts with all of our analysis tools and all the data we have, just like at the census tract and at the county level. And I think being able to provide that information at a real basic level of GIS capability and providing that climate data to people really helps expand the market, you know, for deeper data analysis. So that way they can get into additional tools that, you know, you can take like the next step to do some analysis on. So thanks for that.
Thank you. And Max?
Great. So, thanks so much, Christine. So I just wanted to expand upon something that I mentioned during a previous question, that Replica offers the opportunity to process what we call custom geographies. So if your study area doesn't neatly fit within census-defined boundaries, so whether it's tribal lands or other jurisdictions or just areas of interest, it could be buffers around a corridor, it could be neighborhood boundaries, that we have the ability to custom aggregate our data. So whether you're looking at demographic information or land use information or transportation patterns or vehicle miles traveled information related to climate change impacts, you have the ability to customize your study area in our platform so that you can take a custom look at your study area. So I just wanted to share that. So tribal lands are certainly a good example of that.
All right, thank you. And Suri?
Thanks, Christine. Just wanted to add to Mac's points. Similarly, Streetlight has the same capacity. Users often have like custom polygons. They have like ArcGIS shapefiles they might want to import into the platform. So users can do that for tribal lands as well and understand transportation patterns related to that. And just wanted to highlight Streetlight's differentiator here being that it reflects the recent 2020 demographics attached to these travel patterns. So not only can these travel flows to and fro these tribal lands could be understood, but that in conjunction with the demographics could also play a huge role. That's the Streetlight. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I think we're going to close up questions, and Arlene has a couple things to say. I just want to remind everybody that you can head over to our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, to register for all of our upcoming sessions, to get info on this session if you need it. And then we are recording this session. We'll have it up on our YouTube channel probably on Monday, and that's youtube.com/planningwebcast. I also put it in the chat for you all if you need it. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to you.
Well,
And
I
you're
just
muted. Oh, David, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I just want to thank everybody who presented and everybody for their very critical questions of our panelists. This is a very important topic for planners that are trying to seek better futures for our communities. And I also want to thank Meryl Ledger and Stacy Wright of the Sustainable Communities Division and the Hazard Mitigation Division for working in concert with the Technology Division to put on this webinar. And also appreciate that so many are interested and applying the best technology and data to identify how we can help communities both mitigate and prepare for climate change. Thank you all for attending.
Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend.